You have been standing in that garden center. You know exactly what I mean. Spring hits, the light changes, and something pulls you toward those rows of lush potted plants. The colors are brilliant. The tags make every single one sound like the easiest, most rewarding plant you will ever grow. And you load up your cart because you are optimistic, because you have the space, because this year is going to be the year your containers actually look the way you imagine them. Then summer arrives, and one by one, those plants that looked so promising start to disappoint you. One gets leggy and falls apart by July. Another one refuses to bloom, no matter what you do. A third one takes over everything around it, and not in a good way. You deadhead, you fertilize, you water on a schedule, you do everything right, and still something is wrong. And the quiet frustration that follows is not just about the plants. It is about the time, the money, the expectation you had built up the image in your head of what that patio or that front step or that balcony was supposed to look like. I have been gardening containers for 15 years. I have made every mistake there is to make. I have also, over time, learned to recognize the specific plants that look extraordinary in the store and disappoint consistently in real-world containers. Not because gardeners are doing something wrong, but because certain plants are fundamentally mismatched with container life. The conditions a nursery creates are not the conditions your porch creates. That gap is where the regret lives. This video is the one I wish someone had handed me 15 years ago. I am going to walk you through 6 container plants I spent real money on, real time on, and real hope on, and tell you exactly why each one let me down, what the actual problem was, and what I grow instead now. That gives me the results I was originally chasing. 6 plants, 6 hard lessons, and by the end, you will have a mental filter that will change how you shop for containers permanently. There is one plant on this list that surprises almost everyone. A plant that gets recommended constantly, that shows up in every best container plants article online, and that I spent 3 full seasons trying to make work before I finally understood why it keeps failing. We will get there. But first, I want to start with the one that cost me the most, not just in money, but in wasted growing season. Plant 1. The trailing petunias. You can never keep looking right. Let me tell you what happened. The first summer, I went all in on trailing petunias. I bought 6 of them. 6 healthy, floriferous, beautifully labeled plants in 4-inch pots. The tag said they would cascade 2 to 3 feet. It said they were heat tolerant. It said they would bloom all season with minimal care. I believed every word. I planted them in 2 large mixed containers on my back deck, the kind of containers you see in magazine photos, the kind people stop to admire. By the 4th week of July, both containers looked like they had been abandoned. The petunias had gone from dense and flowering to long, stringy, virtually bare-stemmed messes. I had deadheaded. I had fertilized. I had watered consistently. And I had still watched the whole thing collapse into something I was embarrassed to have visible from the street. Here's what nobody tells you about trailing petunias in containers. They do not just bloom. They work. They are metabolically demanding plants with an almost compulsive growth habit. And that growth habit is not compatible with the reality of most container gardening. They need deadheading so frequently, in peak summer heat, that maintaining them properly is nearly a daily task. Miss a few days, and the spent blooms set seed, and the plant shifts energy from flower production to reproduction, and the whole display collapses faster than you expect. That is the first failure point, but there is a second, and this one is structural. Trailing petunias in containers are extremely prone to what I call the July gap, the period in mid to late summer where heat stress, combined with root-bound conditions, causes a dramatic dieback of lower stems. The trailing growth looks full from a distance, but at the base, where the stems meet the soil, the plant goes woody and bare. The container that looked lush in June looks tired and unfinished by August. You can cut them back hard, and I tried. Multiple times, but recovery in a container, without the root space a garden bed allows, is slow and partial. The root-bound problem compounds everything. In a nursery, these plants get repotted frequently. In your container, the roots hit the walls within 6 to 8 weeks in summer heat, and stressed roots produce stressed blooms. The very thing you bought them for. That continuous, generous cascade is the first thing to go when the plant is under pressure. I still see trailing petunias everywhere. I still see people buying them every spring. And every summer, I watch those same containers look defeated by August. What I grow instead, Calibrachoa. Same trailing habit, smaller, more numerous blooms, far more tolerant of heat and intermittent deadheading. Genuinely self-cleaning, the spent flowers drop cleanly without setting seed, which means the plant keeps blooming without daily intervention. In 15 years of container gardening, Calibrachoa has never let me down the way petunias did. The display holds through September without the midsummer collapse. The transition from petunias to Calibrachoa was the first time I understood that the best container plant is not the most dramatic one in the store. It is the one that keeps performing under real-world conditions without demanding more of you than you can realistically give. Plant 2. Tall ornamental grasses. I want you to picture something. A wide, deep container. Architectural, clean lines. And coming out of the center, a tall, dramatic ornamental grass. The kind with fine blades and movement. The kind that catches wind and light in a way that makes the whole container feel intentional and designed. I chased that image for 2 full growing seasons. The first problem appeared by midsummer. Instability. Ornamental grasses in containers develop a top-heavy growth pattern that low-profile containers simply cannot anchor. A moderate wind would tilt the container. A strong wind would tip it entirely. I tried heavier pots, tried burying the base deeper, tried staking, and every solution created a new problem. Heavier pots become unmovable. Deeper planting promotes crown rot. Stakes look terrible and defeat the entire aesthetic purpose. The second problem was the root mass. Ornamental grasses are vigorous root producers, and in containers, that vigor becomes destructive. Within 1 season, the root ball had completely displaced the growing medium, compressing it into a dense, airless mass around the perimeter of the container. The grass itself stayed alive. Grasses are tough, but nothing else I tried to plant alongside it survived. The container became a grass monoculture, which was not what I had designed. The third problem, and this is the one that finally ended my experiment with tall container grasses, is winter. In the ground, ornamental grasses survive cold through their root systems, which are insulated by soil mass and ground heat. In a container, the roots are exposed on all sides. In my climate zone, even grasses rated for my hardiness zone suffered significant winter kill when containerized because the roots experienced temperatures far colder than they would have in the ground. I lost 2 specimens to what should have been survivable winters. The container amplified the cold exposure in ways the plant tags simply did not account for. What I grow instead, carex, specifically the lower growing, fine textured sedge varieties. Same movement, same fine bladed texture, but carex stays compact, does not destabilize containers. It tolerates shade conditions that ornamental grasses refuse, and in many varieties is genuinely evergreen. It is one of the most underused container plants I know. It provides structure without the height problem, the texture without the root aggression, and it performs in the part-shade situations where most grasses fail completely. Carex is not the showstopper that a 6-foot ornamental grass can be at its best, but it delivers consistently, and in container gardening, consistency is worth more than peak performance with a high failure rate. Plat 3. Ivy geraniums. I want to be honest with you about this one, because ivy geraniums are genuinely beautiful. They are one of the most elegant trailing plants in the nursery in spring. The foliage is clean and glossy. The flowers are intricate and long-lasting, and they photograph better than almost any other container plant you can buy. The problem is that they are engineered for a very specific set of conditions, and most home container situations do not reliably provide those conditions. Ivy geraniums want cool nights. They want temperatures that drop into the 50s or low 60s overnight. They want the kind of summer climate you find in coastal California or the Pacific Northwest. Moderate days, reliably cool evenings, low humidity. In those conditions, they are spectacular. In continental climates, in the South, in the Midwest, in anywhere that gets genuinely hot summers with warm nights, they deteriorate in ways that are difficult to rescue. What you see when heat stress sets in: the foliage yellows from the inside out. The stems become increasingly brittle. Flower production slows, then stops. The plant enters a kind of suspended, unhappy state, not dead, not thriving, just persisting. It looks like a plant that needs something, but nothing you do seems to address whatever that something is. What it actually needs is weather. You cannot give it. I spent 2 seasons trying to protect ivy geraniums from heat by moving containers to morning shade positions, by misting, by adjusting fertilizer away from nitrogen to reduce vegetative growth. I got partial improvement, but never the sustained performance the plant was capable of in better conditions. By the end of each summer, what I had was a scraggly, half-finished version of what I had bought in May. I know what some of you are thinking. People grow ivy geraniums successfully all the time. And you are right, they do, in the right climate. If you garden in coastal conditions, this is not your problem. But if you garden anywhere with humid, warm summers, ivy geraniums are going to consistently underperform in containers. And you will spend years wondering what you are doing wrong before you realize the answer is nothing. The plant is just wrong for your conditions. What I grow instead: regular zonal geraniums for heat tolerance, or in shadier spots, fuchsia, which actually appreciates the cool morning conditions that frustrate other heat-sensitive plants. And for pure, trailing elegance that holds through summer heat, bacopa has earned a permanent place in my containers. Small flowers, clean white, self-cleaning, and genuinely unfazed by the kind of summer heat that reduces ivy geraniums to savivas. Plant 4, wisteria in containers. This is the one. This is the plant I mentioned at the beginning, the one that gets recommended constantly, that I see in every container gardening roundup, that I spent 3 full seasons wrestling with before I understood what was actually happening. Let me be clear about the appeal. A wisteria in a large container, trained around a support, is one of the most romantic things you can grow. The flowers in spring are extraordinary. The fragrance is extraordinary. And yes, it can be done. You will find photographs online of stunning container wisterias. You will find growers and retailers who sell them specifically for container use. What you will not find in most of those sources is an honest accounting of what it takes to maintain that result year after year. Wisteria is one of the most vigorous plants in temperate horticulture. That vigor does not disappear in a container. It gets redirected. Without the ability to expand its root system outward, a containerized wisteria channels its enormous growth energy into shoot production. The result is a plant that requires pruning 2 to 3 times per growing season just to stay manageable. Miss a pruning window and the plant responds by investing even more energy into vegetative growth and, proportionally, less into flower production, which is the entire reason you bought it. The root situation is worse. Wisteria roots are thick, fast-growing, and aggressive. In a container, they will fill every available inch of soil within 2 seasons and then begin to deform the container itself. I watched a glazed ceramic pot crack from the pressure of a wisteria root mass. The solution: annual root pruning and repotting, is a significant undertaking for a large container plant that weighs, by that point, 40 or 50 pounds. And here is the hardest truth about wisteria in containers. The floral display that makes it worth all of this effort is highly sensitive to root disturbance. The process of managing the root system well enough to keep the plant in the container is the same process that disrupts the conditions required for reliable blooming. You end up in a cycle where managing the plant damages the bloom, and the inadequate bloom makes you question whether all the management is worth it. 3 seasons. I gave it 3 honest seasons. The blooms in year 1 were good, in year 2, moderate, in year 3, poor. Had become a maintenance obligation with diminishing floral returns. What I grow instead for that same romantic, fragrant, climbing effect in a container. Clematis, specifically the compact varieties, Viennetta, Pulala, the Boulevard series. These are bred for container culture. The root system stays manageable. The bloom production is consistent year over year. They do not require the aggressive pruning cycle of wisteria, and in the right container, with the right support, they deliver the vertical, flowering drama of wisteria at a fraction of the effort, and without the structural destruction. This is the one I urge you most strongly to reconsider before you buy it. Wisteria is a magnificent plant. In the ground, with room to be what it is worth every bit of the attention it needs. In a container, it will eventually cost you more than it gives. Plant 5, dahlias, in standard containers, before I lose the dahlia lovers in the audience. And I know you are here because everyone loves dahlias. Let me be precise about what I am saying. I am not telling you that dahlias and containers do not mix. I am telling you that dahlias and standard containers do not mix, and there is a very specific reason for that. Dahlias are tuber-forming plants with root systems that grow proportionally to their above-ground size. A dinner plate dahlia, in full growth, has an enormous, spreading root mass that needs consistent access to moisture and nutrients across a wide soil volume. Standard container sizes. The 12, 14, 16-inch pots that most people think of when they think container gardening are genuinely too small for most dahlia varieties to perform well. What happens in an undersized container? The plant grows, sets buds, and begins to produce flowers. Then, as midsummer heat arrives and the above-ground plant is at its most demanding, the root system runs out of room. Water consumption outpaces what a small soil volume can hold. The plant wilts between waterings even when you are watering daily. In response, the plant reduces flower production and increases its investment in tuber formation, a survival response that leaves you with a plant that is sustaining itself rather than performing. I grew dahlias in 14 and 16-inch containers for 3 years. They were alive. They bloomed, but the bloom count and the stem strength were consistently disappointing compared to what I saw from dahlia. The growers using either large containers or garden beds. When I switched to 24-inch containers for my largest varieties and switched the smaller varieties to 15 to 18-inch containers, the performance difference was significant. More blooms, stronger stems, less wilting, less disease pressure, because a well-watered plant in adequate soil volume handles heat stress better than a root-bound plant in survival mode. The lesson from dahlias is not to avoid them in containers. It is to resist the impulse toward smaller, more manageable containers and give them the volume they actually need. Plant 6, Phormium, New Zealand flax. This last one might be the most instructive failure of the 6, because the problem with phormium in containers is not immediately obvious. It does not fail dramatically. It fails slowly, in a way that takes seasons to fully reveal itself. Phormium is sold as a structural centerpiece plant for containers. Bold, upright, architectural, available in a spectacular range of foliage colors from deep burgundy to lime green to variegated bronze. It looks extraordinary in the nursery. It looks extraordinary in the container for the first season. That is where the problems begin to accumulate, quietly. The first issue is growth rate. Phormium is genuinely vigorous. In a container, the offset production, the new fans of leaves that emerge from the base of the plant, happens faster than most people expect, and each offset competes with the parent plant for the limited soil volume. Within 2 to 3 seasons, a single phormium purchase becomes a crowded mass of fans that has consumed all availables. Container space and begun to push itself out of the pot from below. Dividing and repotting is the standard advice for this situation. And it works once. But phormiums resent root disturbance. After division and repotting, they typically sulk for a season, producing no new growth and looking far less impressive than they did before intervention. The cycle of impressive growth, crowding, division, sulking, and recovery is a multi-year cycle that requires patience and many container gardeners do not have. The second issue is cold hardiness, and this one catches people by surprise more than anything else on this list. Phormium is rated for hardiness zones 7 and above in most plant references. In the ground, in a sheltered position, in zone 7, it often survives. In a container in zone 7, it frequently does not because the container provides essentially no root insulation, and the roots are the plant's most cold-sensitive part. I have lost phormiums to winters that should not have touched them, purely because the container amplified cold exposure in a way the hardiness zone rating did not account for. The combination of aggressive growth, resentment of the management that growth requires, and unexpected cold sensitivity in containers makes phormium a plant I no longer recommend for most container situations. Despite how beautiful it looks on the sales bench, what I grow instead for that same bold, upright, structural effect, Cordyline australis, which tolerates the same management cycle with far less sulking, or tall, agapanthus, which provides architectural height with the bonus of spectacular summer bloom without phormium's cold sensitivity and division resentment. Structural container plants should look dramatic without requiring heroic intervention every second season. That is the standard I now hold all my centerpiece choices to. There is something I want to say before I wrap this up, because I think the honest version of this conversation goes a little deeper than a list of plants. If you have subscribed to this channel, you are not a passive gardener. You are someone who thinks about this, who invests in it, who wants to get it right. That means you have probably bought at least one plant on this list. You have probably stood in the garden center, making exactly the choices I described. And you have probably had the experience of watching your expectations not quite materialize the way you planned. That is not a failure. That is the actual education. Every plant on this list taught me something I could not have learned from a book or a video. The petunias taught me the difference between display, performance, and sustained performance. The grasses taught me that architectural drama has to be matched by architectural root systems. The ivy geraniums taught me that climate compatibility is not a preference, it is a requirement. Wisteria taught me that magnificent plants have legitimate needs, and a container cannot meet all of them. The dahlias taught me that container size is a performance variable, not an aesthetic choice. The phormium taught me that a plant's ratings in the ground and its behavior in a container are two different conversations. If you want a resource that goes beyond what to buy and gets into the specific care systems that make containers actually perform, watering schedules, soil composition for different container sizes, fertilizer timing through the season. That is what this channel does every week. Subscribing is how you make sure you see it when it posts, because the algorithm does not reliably show channel content to people who are not subscribed. Now you have 6 plants to reconsider, and you have the replacements for each of them. What I want to know from you is this. Which one on this list have you already tried? Drop it in the comments. Tell me what happened. Your experience matters to everyone watching this channel who is about to make the same choice, and your comment might be the thing that saves them a full growing season of frustration. There is a moment every experienced container gardener reaches, and it is not when they stop making mistakes. It is when they stop blaming themselves for the mistakes that were never really theirs to make. When you stop buying phormiums that were never going to thrive in your container. Stop fighting wisteria's nature in a pot it was never suited for. Stop trying to make petunias work through August with pot daily deadheading. You get that time, that energy, and that money back. You put it into plants that reward you instead of challenge you. You watch your containers actually look the way you imagined them. And then you start imagining things even better. That is where 15 years of lessons gets you. I am glad to hand them to you now, all at once, before they cost you another season.